And Chelsea have been able to register Pedro, which means that he could feature against Palmeiras. The message I'm getting is that Rashford will only join a team with Champions League football. So Arsenal have got a clear run. They've got player buy-in. Now we have to wait and see whether that translates into a bid imminently. And that's the more complicated part.
Hello and welcome to The Window. My name is Harry Durham. Every day of the transfer window, we'll keep you up to date with all of the deals, all of the movers and shakers in and out of the Premier League. Joining me to discuss the big transfer stories of the day is talkSPORT transfer expert Ben Jacobs. Ben, let's kick off with the big news. Joao Pedro has officially left Brighton and is now a Chelsea player. What's the lowdown with this deal? How much will he get a week? How long is the contract? And what was the fee?
Yeah, it's an 8-year deal for a 60 million package, and Chelsea feel that Joao Pedro has the kind of versatility that they're looking for. It actually happened very quickly in the end because there's a 3rd of July deadline to register players in time for the knockout phase of the Club World Cup. And Chelsea have been able to register Pedro, which means that he could feature against Palmeiras, or obviously if they go further in the tournament when he's had more time with the squad, then he'll be able to play. And that's in contrast to Jamie Gittins, who Chelsea have also signed. I'm expecting an announcement relatively imminently there, but he's not part of the Club World Cup squad because of the fact that he was already registered for Dortmund, and you can't play for 2 clubs during the same tournament. And this is why there was more urgency to force through the Pedro deal. He was announced doing kick-ups on Miami Beach, where Chelsea are training. He spoke in advance to Andres Santos via social media, and also the former Chelsea defender David Luiz, who is one of his mentors. And in the end, Pedro only wanted Chelsea. And this deal moved fast in the month of June. So there's actually a situation in May where Newcastle were pushing and Chelsea simply were not in the race. They weren't exploring a deal. They hadn't held any talks whatsoever. And the expectation at that point was that they'd focus on Liam Delap and then assess exactly what they needed. But after recruitment meetings that followed in the early part of June, Chelsea decided that this is the kind of profile that they're looking for. And then from there, it was all relatively simple because Brighton were willing to sanction a sale. Chelsea happy to meet the valuation. It's just a deal that suits all parties. And Pedro's going to come in a very versatile role. He'll be given freedom. And now the expectation is that there's a realistic, if not strong, chance that Christopher Nkunku departs. There's interest from Arsenal in Noni Madueke, even though it's not advanced at this point. Some say at the right price that Chelsea would be willing to sanction a Nicholas Jackson sale, but we'll have to wait and see on that one because he's a player that is not exactly going to be forced out, and Enzo Maresca appreciates. But what it means is when you add all that up, there might still be another Chelsea attacker to come.
What does the future look like for Raheem Sterling at Chelsea?
Chelsea want to find a solution for Raheem Sterling, ideally a permanent exit. We wait and see whether later in the window, if nothing moves, if they're prepared to maybe entertain another kind of loan deal just to get the wage off the books. But Chelsea don't see Raheem Sterling as part of their plans. The Arsenal loan was something that Chelsea at the time thought would suit all parties, but it didn't quite work out for Arsenal, and they're not looking to make that permanent, and there was no option anyway as part of the deal. So Sterling's in a little bit of limbo at the moment, and Chelsea as a result have not included him in this Club World Cup squad, and it's up to Sterling now to try and find a suitor. There's Saudi interest, but he's never really been keen on that, so he'll have to change his mind if anything's to develop there. But there's nothing too concrete at the moment for Sterling. The good news is there's a variety of teams all looking for left wingers in Europe and in Saudi Arabia and in Turkey as well. So I think Sterling will have options, but he might have to be a little bit patient. And the reason why he's surplus to requirements at Chelsea is to an extent age and wage, and the fact that now Jamie Gittins is incoming, Tyreek George is highly rated. He could even be sent out on loan, George, for a bit of development, but Chelsea think that he's got a really strong future at the football club as well. And then Pedro Neto can switch over to that left-hand side, plus the fact that you got Giovanni Quenda arriving as a left winger from Sporting in 2026. So Raheem Sterling too far down the pecking order. And when you're that far down the pecking order and on such a big wage, it's obvious that Chelsea want to find a solution and ultimately an exit sooner rather than later.
Ben, it's been reported in the last 24 hours that Marcus Rashford could be on his way to Bayern Munich. There is talk of a £40 million move to take him away from Old Trafford. Do we have any updates on how things are progressing?
Yeah, the simple fact is Manchester United are taking this 40 million that was an option to buy for Aston Villa and saying that's the asking price for Marcus Rashford. So you've got Barcelona that would ideally like to do Nico Williams and maybe still explore a Rashford deal and utilise Rashford in a more central position. Player wants Barcelona. Barca would be keen on the right terms, but Manchester United are not at this stage prepared to do a loan. So either it's going to drag on a little bit later and Manchester United's hand may be a little bit more forced, or they'll stick to that 40 million asking price, and at that number it doesn't feel like a deal that Barcelona could do. You got Bayern Munich. This could be an interesting one to watch, and they've added Marcus Rashford to a list of several targets. Bayern is still alert to the Nico Williams situation in case anything doesn't happen with Barcelona, but I think the struggle for Bayern is going to be, if for any reason Barca can't pull this Nico Williams deal off financially, there's a fair chance he might just extend at Athletic Bilbao. And as I revealed a few weeks ago, there's a contract renewal proposal on the table as well, and then wait a year and then maybe still go to Barcelona, but in 2026 if it doesn't come off now. And that's led Bayern to start looking at other potential targets, and Marcus Rashford is one of them. Rashford would likely have to take a pay cut to Bayern or to anywhere other than Saudi Arabia. You've got Al Ahly in Saudi who like the player and the profile, but there's never been a clear indication from the Rashford camp that he's prepared to go there. In fact, the message I'm getting is that Rashford will only join a team with Champions League football, especially because Thomas Tuchel's told him, go and play in the Champions League for a season and you've got a great chance of making the 2026 World Cup squad. So Rashford will be thinking about his next move in the context of Champions League, in the context of who can afford his wage, and in the context of the 2026 World Cup. And all that means there's a relatively small pool of suitors as well. So do keep an eye on Bayern, because that could potentially develop, even though they've got other options on that left-hand side. Rashford has had some interest from Turkey as well. I think he's more inclined to go to a Big Five league if possible. And then we should just mention Villa, who are not going to take the option to buy, not really financially feasible to them, even though they've sold the women's team to ease their PSR concerns to their parent company, a bit like Chelsea have done. But they're aware that it's a long-term contract Rashford's looking for, and the wage is too high, coupled with the fact that Villa don't have Champions League football. So Villa are not going to move, but Bayern could enter the race for Rashford.
Yeah, we know that Marcus Rashford had a decent loan spell at Aston Villa last season. Is Bayern the perfect destination for him to revive his career?
Yeah, I think so. He'd be a good fit in that system, although what's interesting is that Rashford's pitching himself to Barca as a central player, and Bayern are looking for a more traditional, old-school, touchline-hugging winger that can also provide offensive output. So if you only look at the system and the manager and teammates like Harry Kane, Rashford would be a good fit there, and I think that it could give him the strongest possible opportunity to find some form or continue his Villa form and get right in Thomas Tuchel's England plans, and he's already there at the moment, but could move backwards in the context of England if this drags on during the summer. He doesn't find a club, he's frozen out at Manchester United during pre-season and so on. So there will be a bit of urgency, I think. Now we're into July. Originally I was told that Rashford was going to take June intentionally, and this was a player-driven choice to really sound out suitors, knowing he put himself in the shop window at Aston Villa, and then by the end of June or early July was hoping for a solution. If he has to wait a little bit longer into late July or early August, you start to think the season's about to start. He doesn't have a club. That's where maybe others will be able to turn Thomas Tuchel's head. And from Rashford's point of view, he might just start feeling a little bit less comfortable about his possibility of making that 2026 World Cup, at least until he finds his next club. So I think it is in the interest of all parties, of Rashford and Manchester United, to try and resolve this situation quickly, because one thing's for sure, he doesn't have a long-term future at Manchester United.
Ben, there are reports that Eberechi Eze is open with a move to Arsenal from Crystal Palace. We already know that Eze's release clause is set to be in the region of £60 million or £68 million with bonuses. Arsenal have done some smart business already in the transfer window. They may not have signed superstars, but if all goes smoothly, When can Arsenal fans expect to see Eze in that red shirt?
Yeah, I always said that Arsenal's window will start on July the 1st, and now they're moving. And I'll reiterate what I've also predicted before, for what it's worth, that come the end of the window, the spend of Arsenal and Liverpool will not be too far apart, because Arsenal have got a lot of priority positions. There'll be money spent on a left winger. There might be money spent on a right winger. There'll likely be an attacking midfielder, and that's how Eze is being viewed. So it's Eze plus left winger. And then you've still got a number 9 as well. Add Norgard, who has done the first part of his medical and is expected to complete his move next week. And then on top of that, factor in the 60 million or so euros outlay, a little bit more, in fact, 'cause they went above the release clause for Martin Zubimendi, and Arsenal really getting going. Mosquera is another one they're very optimistic on. They've not quite bid the asking price of in and around 20 million euros, but that might come soon. And even though Valencia have offered Mosquera a new deal, the clear direction of travel is the players leaning towards Arsenal rather than extending. With Eze, he's keen on a move. There's no doubt about that. And there was a meeting over the weekend where senior football and recruitment staff from Arsenal Football Club were present, pitching to Eze. So this is not just interest, this is advancing on the player side, but there's been no bid yet to Crystal Palace, and that's the bit that just might add a little complication, because my understanding is that the release clause, the mechanism for triggering it, is a little bit complicated, a bit like that of Michael Olise, and Arsenal want to go below the clause or with a different kind of structure around the clause. So I do think we will get a situation where Arsenal place a bid. I don't think this is going to go away. There was a point maybe 6 weeks ago where it looked like Tottenham and Arsenal may go head-to-head, but that's also not my understanding, as we revealed on talkSPORT. Spurs have backed off. It was appreciation, but nothing more. So Arsenal have got a clear run. They've got player buy-in. Now we have to wait and see whether that translates into a bid imminently, and that's the more complicated part, especially if Arsenal want to go around the clause. But if Arsenal want Eze, then my understanding is Eze wants Arsenal, which means this one does have a very realistic chance of getting over the line. And then the other thing that I would say is, when we refer to these Arsenal positions, it's important to note how they might act. So on the one hand, it's going to be a number 9 come what may, and I won't over-reiterate the Gyökeres Sesko situation, because I think Arsenal fans are sick of it, but either for 70 million, and both players want the move, so if they can get that price for one or the other, then I expect Andrea Berta to advance, but it won't be both, only one. Then you have Eze, who's being seen as separate to the left winger. The left winger could be Rodrigo, if the player after the Club World Cup decides he wants to leave Real Madrid. That's a dream target for Arsenal, and the advantage there is you might be able to stop as far as adding to your front line, because Rodrigo wants to play left, and that would be Arsenal's expectation, that he comes in as a starting left winger, perhaps calling into question, for example, the future of Gabriel Martinelli, who has Saudi interest. But because the fact at Real he's played so often due to Vinny Jr. and Mbappe on the right, you've got the opportunity to occasionally utilise a profile like that as cover for Saka if you need, and then make him your predominant left-wing starter. And that might mean you could put 90 million towards one player instead of 45 and 45 for two. The other idea is, if you don't get Rodrigo, you still buy a starting left winger, but maybe then there's an escalation of Arsenal's interest in Noni Madueke, and then suddenly you've got a right winger, a left winger, an attacking midfielder, and a number 9. So I'd be surprised if Arsenal don't bring in 3 attack-minded players. Definitely a 9, certainly a central midfielder, absolutely a left winger. And then depending on who that left winger is and how versatile they are, there could be a right-sided winger also that comes in. And in Madueke's case, he's not as comfortable switching sides. So if they go down that line and pursue Madueke, it's likely to be 4 that end up at Arsenal. And that's what I mean about my first point. This window right now, 2 days into July, is basically 2 days old, barring the Norgard deal and the Zubimendi one that they almost pre-agreed in January. So Arsenal fans that are kind of panicking, are worried other teams are getting ahead of them, just wait until July is over in early August, because I think you'll see your window really starting to take shape.
Do you know what? I read this morning, which was really interesting, that Declan Rice spoke to Mikel Arteta and gave Eze rave reviews. Is there any truth in this? And are we actually seeing transfer agent Rice?
Well, I'm not really aware of like Agent Rice, but he is friendly with Eze, and it's very normal for players to speak to each other. And ultimately, that gives you a little bit of insight as to what the dressing room is like. I don't think Rice needs to pitch the Arsenal project. I think from his perspective, if he's being really selfish, Eze will help him, because you'll have a situation potentially where Zubimendi is deep. Eze has a lot of freedom should he join, and Rice goes back to being box to box where he was so excellent for West Ham, which means that he can provide both defensive cover as a 6, but also move into that 8 position and hopefully build upon his offensive output. And that feels like a real balance. Interestingly, when you spell it out like that, there may not be room for Martin Odegaard, which is fascinating in itself. I don't think Arsenal are thinking about any exit there, but you've definitely got a scenario where if Eze arrives, Rice is on form and Zubimendi's in the side, then Odegaard may be getting a little bit less game time or freedom. And as the captain of the football club, let's kind of wait and see how that dynamic potentially develops as well. But it's normal for Eze to speak to people he knows about Arsenal. But I don't think Eze needs that much convincing either. As I said before, he's keen on the move. If Arsenal were to make a bid and agree a package with Crystal Palace, I would expect it to be relatively easy for Eze to agree terms, because he's open to that move.
Ben, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the Philadelphia sunshine. To keep up to date with the window, please remember to subscribe to the talkSPORT YouTube channel just down below.